All right, welcome everybody to Getting to the Grub, Transportation, Land Use, and Food Access. My name is CJ. I am the Director of Training and Placemaking at Grow Smart Rhode Island. We have an awesome team of panelists here today with us. We got Nessa Richman, she'll be our moderator. We have Dominique Resendes, she's with West Elmwood Housing. We have Eric Weis of Cogent, and we have Laura Edwards-Orr of Center for Good Food Purchasing. We're not going to cover full bios today, but everyone's full bios are available on our website, so please pop on there. You can read more about these folks. So just some quick things here. This is part of our Power of Place Summit, originally scheduled for way back in March, late March, which seems like a world away now. Obviously, we wish we could be holding this in person, but we are really glad that we can do this online because it seems like a lot more folks can access all of these wonderful panels that we have. We have these panels as part of our kind of Wednesday morning webinar series. Every single Wednesday morning at 10, we'll have a different panel webinar. There's a full list on our website where you can register. They are included in the price of a summit ticket, but if you don't have a summit ticket, you can still just purchase an individual webinar. So you can pop on and look at the menu. This will be leading up all the way up until September 25th, these webinars. September 25th is our kind of like half-day plenary replacement for the in-person summit. So it'll be virtual. It'll feature Scott Spencer of the Smart Growth America Network and the Annie Casey Foundation, along with award-winning columnist E.J. Dion of the Washington Post and the Brookings Institution. So it's gonna have some great speakers, a couple panels that day as well. Should be a nice big event. Of course, we couldn't do this without our wonderful sponsors who I'll feature right here. Thank you to our sponsors. All these webinars are approved for one AICP credit. So if you need those, you can just pop onto their website and go through their little process there. This is also being recorded. So just so you know, it's being recorded. And if you want to watch it again later, it'll be made available to everyone with that registered pretty shortly after this. And the last thing before we get going is that there will be a Q&A session at the very end, but please feel free to type in a question whenever you have them, and we'll be sure to address it as many as we can, at least toward the end of our webinar today. And before I hand it off to Nessa, I'm going to launch this poll and ask everyone here what sector you're representing today, whether you're a student or some kind of government agency, or you're a private planner or private practice, nonprofit, whatever. Just give you a few seconds to fill this out. It's really helpful for us. Couple more seconds. All right, I'm going to share the results here. And our panelists can see this as well, right? Great, okay, cool. Looks like we got nonprofit folks here, so you're in good company. Thanks for being with us. Thank you folks for this. We have a good spread. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to hand it off to Nessa Richman.
Thank you. And I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay, does that look good for everybody? Wonderful. So today we're going to be focusing on food access. And when this event was planned, most of us thought that having reliable access to the food that we needed was a given, and that food access problems were something that happened to other people. Now, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we've all had to face empty grocery store shelves and buying limits. And I think we all understand a little bit better the enormity and complexity of the food system that gets our food from farms and the sea to our dinner tables. So today you will still gain an understanding of that complicated relationship between transportation trends in grocery stores and food center siting, design, and availability. And you'll also learn about how the US and Rhode Island in particular have been working to respond to the emergency food access needs that have been presenting right now, and how we're starting to plan for a food system that is more resilient to pandemics and severe weather events and other types of shocks in the future. We hope that you'll view this with the question in mind of what sorts of incentives and programs and policies can be put into place from a transportation planning perspective to address these challenges. So my name is Nessa Richman, and I'm the Network Director of the Rhode Island Food Policy Council. I'm going to give you a super quick introduction to the Council and to some of the related resources we have before I hand things over to our panel, which consists of Laura Edwards-Orr, who's the Director of Institutional Impact for the Center for Good Food Purchasing, Eric Weis, who's the President of Cogent, and Dominique Resendes, who's the Manager of Community Building Projects at the West Elmwood Housing Development Corporation. So let's see if I can advance my slide. So food policy councils are organizations that connect interest in farming, food access, public health, economic development, and a lot more. We act as forums for coordinated action on food issues, and we work to identify and propose innovative solutions to state food systems issues. And this is our council this year. There's Dominique right there. Our mission is to promote an equitable, economically vibrant, and environmentally sustainable food system in Rhode Island. And we do that through building coalitions, promoting good food and agriculture policy, and taking on some high impact projects. So the state has many, many food access programs that existed before COVID and new ones that have popped up. And Laura is really going to be discussing those in a bit more detail next. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to a couple of the resources provided or developed by the Food Policy Council. So the first one I want to tell you about is this food access map. It marries food retail locations and emergency food sites with transit routes and other key data related to poverty. There's a link to this map at the bottom of the page. And there are different layers in the map. You can see it shows farmers markets, WIC locations, and tracts that have poverty levels. When you zoom in on a particular area, this is what the map can give you. So post-COVID, I just want to touch on one thing that the state has been doing in terms of developing new resources, and that is the Rhode Island Delivers website. Of course, many Rhode Island residents, including those who are SNAP users and others, want to have their food delivered to their homes during this time. And so they developed this site, specifically the Office of Healthy Aging developed this site called Rhode Island Delivers. The site is right there on the slide. And although you can't read this now, you can go there and click through to, I think, a pretty good description of how people can get food delivered. This was originally designed for people who were in quarantine, but of course the resources are available to anyone. In addition, the Food Policy Council developed an emergency and supplemental food access map post-COVID. This is a map just based, as you can tell, on Google Maps. And here we have school meal pickup locations, which will be updated soon now that the schools are closing, food pantries, the senior meal pickup sites, and also WIC vendors and SNAP vendors. And again, you can type your town in and get to a lot more detailed information. That's all I'm going to cover in any type of detail today, but I do want to mention that we have a number of other resources that we've been working on in terms of COVID-19 response. Those live on our website, which is rifoodcouncil.org. And they touch on communication, technical assistance provision, assistance with fundraising for certain entities, and doing some individual projects that help to align resources to help ensure food security for all populations. And with that, I would like to go ahead and hand it off to Laura, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have at the end of all of the presentations.
Thanks, Nessa. It's a great introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And make it bigger. Oh, bear with me just a second. Okay. Yeah, thanks so much for having me and for the invitation, CJ. Before I dive into this depressing slide that we named might be a picture or headline for a zombie movie, let me just explain a little bit about what I hope to bring to this conversation today and how it's been updated in light of COVID-19. So I am the Director of Institutional Impact with the Center for Good Food Purchasing. I work with institutions across the country to help harness their procurement dollars on behalf of a more just, resilient, and sustainable food system. But prior to that work, I managed a values-based wholesale produce distribution nonprofit, Red Tomato, based in Massachusetts, servicing chain grocery stores. And so in combination with that work of developing those value chains, spent quite a bit of time studying trends in the retail market. And so the first part of my presentation, I want to walk really quickly through an overview of the state of bricks and mortar food retailing today, and where there are some challenges and opportunities, and then pivot over to some new food access points in light of COVID times that we might be able to reflect on as case studies for future innovations in food access in our communities. So, you know, the story of supermarkets consolidating and moving out to the suburbs and replacing sort of the walkable mom and pop grocery stores that some of us might have grown up with access to if you grew up in a city might feel familiar or intuitive to folks. The grocery stores we have today are enormous. Many of them chasing the model of a superstore, supercenter like a Walmart or other exceptionally large box stores that are meant to serve all things to all people. So I'm not going to cover that history, but really talk more about the state of that model today as it's grown, become focused on the suburban shopper and trying to serve all markets like those supercenters that we're familiar with. That business model is deeply challenged and in many cases failing right now. And the factors that are impacting that, and you'll see there's a cover of a book one of my mentors who teaches at the Harvard Business Study wrote about bricks and mortar retail and the current state here. Much of this data is from that book. The factors that we look at when we consider the failing grocery store model right now are certainly threats to e-commerce, and that will feel very familiar in the COVID context. More and more shopping happening online rather than in stores, with the exception of some perishable products that people still tend to buy, prefer to buy on site. A shrinking middle class, so the economic disparities that we're talking about, many of which have really come to light in the COVID crisis. The model of the grocery store was built on a thriving middle class, and when that sector is failing, so too is this model, this business model. Segmentation of shopping trips, far less true in COVID times, but in normal times, you know, you might go to one store for one thing and another store for another, often looking for the best deals or the best price. And we call that segmentation of shopping trips. That reduces the overall dollars spent in one single shopping trip. And then this question of size, scale, and location that I think really overlaps with this theme of transportation and access, where we have very, very large stores and profitability per square foot is going down as traffic is challenged and those shopping trips are segmented and people have fewer dollars to spend. And that suburban location, chasing that affluent middle class shopper that might not be so relevant now as, I suppose pre-COVID, there's definitely a shift towards more urban living, particularly folks who are thinking about walkability and sustainability. So those are some of the factors that are really undercutting what was once a thriving business model in the grocery store industry is now quite challenged. So to talk just real quickly in the scholarly fields of retailing, which exists and is fascinating, we often look to European models for what might be coming next. And I just want to highlight two models that have really proven to be, to address the business model of the grocery store that may or may not impact food access as we talk about it now. So the first is a click and collect model, quote unquote. Not dissimilar from the curbside pickup models we're seeing in conventional anchor grocery stores today. Although in Europe, they've gone so far as to have just these pickup locations. So the bricks and mortar store is gone. And essentially you're ordering online and literally going through a drive-through and picking up your locations. And those have been very, very profitable because you can have a smaller footprint. You can put these pickup sites almost anywhere. You don't need the kind of square footage or parking space or any of the other infrastructure that a quote unquote traditional grocery store would require. And the other, probably more relevant to our conversation today, are, I have this called an automated future store, but essentially small format urban locations, maybe 10,000 square feet. If they have warehousing or storage, it goes up. Rather than needing that large footprint that we're used to with grocery stores. And a lot of, in many cases, a lot of that storage is automated. So you really only need to staff your floor. You don't need to staff the back of the house. And in these cases, the most successful models that we're looking at, they really focus on a high quality shopper experience. So the product selection focuses on fresh and perishable products that folks are not as comfortable buying online, and sort of more of an experience with tastings and a highly trained staff that can introduce people to the products that they might have, so that not only are you able to walk in your neighborhood to a store and find high quality products, but you can also have a culinary experience or an educational experience while you're doing so. And I am just going to keep cruising along here. And one thing I want to mention, when we think about access, it can be a somewhat limiting frame. So in the sustainable food world and food access world, we've started to pivot away from this phrase food deserts, which might feel or sound familiar, to a construct of food apartheid. And that acknowledges that food deserts are constructed by the policies and designs that we've put in place. It's intentional. It's not a natural occurrence that we have neighborhoods without access to good food or high quality food or food at all. So access is really just a strategy. It's mechanical. Whereas if we think about a much broader frame of food sovereignty, that people have access and control over the food that they have in their communities, that it be culturally appropriate and reflective of the communities that surround it. That's a restorative act. It's a much broader frame. So it's not just about infrastructure, but it's how we think about the food, and it's what food folks have access to in their communities. The slide here, dollar stores, they're one of the most prevalent food retailers in the country, and that's increasing, and they're everywhere. They target low-income communities, and they are walkable. So they're a good example of where access doesn't necessarily address these larger concerns around food sovereignty and culture and quality of life in the communities where those stores are located. Okay. In 2 minutes, I'm going to try and cover. So I am mindful now in my current work, working nationally, that I don't have a fully Rhode Island context for some of this, but I wanted to name some of the ways that we're seeing local communities behave in a more resilient way in COVID-19 times. And I think we can look at some of these examples as case studies in what it means to relocalize food access points and food sovereignty, as I talk about in the last slide. So farmers markets in Rhode Island and in many other states were deemed essential and allowed to stay open during COVID closures so that communities would maintain that point of access and high quality food. Likewise, community-supported agriculture programs across the country are recording record subscription rates. That's where you would pay for a weekly food box from a specific farm or collaborative of farms. The USDA has worked with emergency services to launch a program called Farmers to Families Food Box Program. This is happening nationally. There's a wide array of food distribution organizations that have gotten contracts through this program. They have to be done in partnership with a community-based nonprofit. There's quite a bit of skepticism about some of the companies that have won contracts, but in communities where there was a well-established values-based food distribution organization like we have in Farm Fresh Rhode Island, we've seen contracts go to folks working on these issues. So Farm Fresh Rhode Island working in partnership with the Community Food Bank to deliver, I think their target is 3,000 boxes of food a week. And that contract has the potential to go through the end of the year. My timer is dinging at me. But just real quickly, direct to consumer deliveries, as Nessa highlighted, we're seeing that with mainstream retail. We're also seeing organizations like Farm Fresh, Market Mobile, doing consumer deliveries, and even collaboratives of growers leveraging their infrastructure to bring food directly to people's homes. Online SNAP, so SNAP used to be called food stamps, benefits to folks who are potentially economically disadvantaged or might not be able to afford the cost of groceries. This was a pilot that was running in 7 states prior to COVID and has been expanded to 37 states. Rhode Island was one of the first. So this is a great opportunity for folks to leverage online ordering and home delivery and use their SNAP nutrition dollars. What we're seeing in that rapid expansion is that it heavily favors the national retailers that were participating in the smaller pilot to begin with in Rhode Island. That would be Amazon and Walmart. Pandemic SNAP. So this is a new added benefit for families that were enrolled in the free and reduced lunch program. This would be an additional SNAP benefit of $5.70 per school day per child that was enrolled in that program. And that is whether or not that family might have already been enrolled in SNAP benefits. The pandemic SNAP would be on top of that or in addition. And lastly, this is the issue that I'm working on the most. Schools have pivoted their feeding programs to become emergency feeding centers. So schools are offering meals to children up to age 18 in their districts. They're not required to verify whether that child was eligible for free and reduced lunches. They're open to anybody. They're able to give those meals to parents without the children on site, and they're able to send those meals home rather than serving them on site due to 3 USDA waivers that are in place right now through the end of the summer. Unfortunately, that program has been challenged by the fact that we have waivers at the national level, but states are required to apply and enroll locally. So like so many other COVID initiatives, the implementation has been complicated by sometimes a disconnect between federal leadership and state ability to move things quickly. So happy to say more about any of this in the Q&A period, but I am going to pass the screen and the microphone over to Eric.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you, CJ and GrowSmart, for organizing. My name is Eric Weis, and by way of brief introduction, I'm a transportation planner. Been working for over 20 years with local, regional, and state agencies and organizations to make conditions better for people who get around on foot and by bike, primarily. I'm now in private practice based in Providence, Rhode Island. My company is called Cogent. And this slide here shows the title, Food Shopping by Bus, Foot, or Bicycle, which is actually my subtitle. The real title for this slideshow, which I didn't put on here because I didn't think CJ would let me, is Parking Lots Are the Absolute Worst. And we'll get into that a little bit as we move through some of these slides.
I would have allowed it.
Thank you, CJ. So, transportation choices and safety in our cities and towns. These are the results of choices that we as a society make constantly. these are choices about land use policy, about street design, and about regulation of behavior of such things like driving while intoxicated or driving while using a cell phone. And the background for a lot of this is that we don't shop the way we used to. We're looking at a 12-month-old approximately photo of what used to be the Eagle supermarket on Ives Street in Providence. And this was the grocery store for Fox Point. Now it's turning into like a sandwich, like a trendy sandwich shop where you can get nitro cart stuff, you know. And we can argue some other time about the utility to the neighborhood of one institution versus another. But the fact is, these general purpose neighborhood grocery stores are basically a thing of the past. But it wasn't that long ago that you know, there were commercial districts where people would go to the butcher shop, to the baker, to the greengrocer, et cetera, walking around the neighborhood, running into your friends and neighbors and extended family. And people could get to these places without much worry for their safety because there were sidewalks and people could take public transit, streetcars and trolleys and buses. But now for the average American, it's all about the supermarket, away from city centers, right? And it's harder to get to these places by bus or on foot or by bike. This new model, the supermarket model, doesn't always require a car, but it makes it more difficult to shop without one. As an aside, in areas that have higher percentages of more recent immigrants to our communities, neighborhood markets with culturally relevant foods have never stopped being important. We're looking at a photo here of the new Battambang market, a Cambodian market on Broad Street in Providence. Ama's Variety in Pawtucket on Main Street is a Venezuelan market offering a, you know, a pretty broad range of the type of foods that people who want to cook Venezuelan dishes are going to want. But those are the exception rather than the rule. And of course, during this weird pandemic period, people's shopping has changed again. There's been an uptick in the use of grocery delivery services and some local food-related businesses, such as Small Point Cafe. I stole a screenshot of their Facebook page here. They've started offering grocery pickup as well. You know, they're going to Restaurant Depot to get all their food to make their stuff. People can place an order with the cafe and they'll pick up extra stuff, and then people can just walk down the block from their apartment to get a bag of groceries. As well, also, as has already been touched on, school lunches continue to be available to public school students. Here in Providence, the school day has a break from 11 to 1. 2 hours might seem like a lot of time, but if you have to consider the fact that it takes time to get from home to the school to pick up the food and then get home again and eat it, and then at 1 o'clock be ready to log back on, it's perfectly logical. But as I said before, these are the exceptions, not the rule. Supermarket, still the king, and that can be a problem because parking lots are the absolute worst. We as a society, as the United States of America, we are really bad at driving cars. The trends lately are that about 40,000 people are killed on our streets and highways every year. And parking lots offer special challenges to our terrible drivers because we're backing out of spaces, we're half blind while we're doing it, we can't see people approaching. The cars that we're parked next to are much taller than they used to be. Everybody needs to drive an SUV now. And so if there's a kid or a small adult walking, you can't see them until you're basically backing up into them. And as we're driving down the lanes looking for a place to park, we're constantly craning our necks left and right, taking our eyes off of the pavement right in front of us. It's a really awful system. However, our supermarket plazas cater almost exclusively to drivers. You're looking at an aerial view of the Shaw's Plaza in Pawtucket, bounded on the west by George Bennett Highway and on the sort of southeast by Cottage Street. Neither of those streets bordering this plaza has an inch of sidewalk. And of course, I don't even have to say it out loud. There's no sidewalks inside the property either. You already knew that. I've highlighted a little spot there we're going to focus in on, because you can see that this is a residential neighborhood right next to it. And there's this little stub of a dead-end street called Woodbine Street with one house on it, which abuts this parking lot. And there's actually a gap in the fence there. I'm not sure how inviting that would look if it were after sundown, considering that there's no, the lighting is probably not as good as you want it to be. I think I would feel pretty nervous about walking through that gap into the edge of a supermarket plaza. And even if you did, you still have to cross this expanse without an inch of sidewalk or any pavement markings to help highlight your presence or give you any sense of safety. For that person who lives right there on that little stub of a dead-end street, they might feel safer driving their car 2 blocks, parking it, less than 100 meters from their car, and then walking to the entrance. This is an aerial of University Heights on the east side of Providence. It's between North Main and Camp Street. In the 50s, up until the 50s, early 60s, this was a very vibrant Black middle-class neighborhood. And then, of course, urban renewal came. And just like happened with neighborhoods, particularly neighborhoods of color, all across the country, urban renewal ravaged University Heights. And now, instead of a neighborhood called University Heights, we have a shopping plaza called University Heights, which is as separated from the adjacent housing as it could possibly be. I'm gonna zoom in just a little bit. The original design, 60 years ago, did have pedestrian connections between the housing and the shopping. Unfortunately, it was redesigned in the 70s and 80s, and the connection was completely severed. There's one teeny little path that remains in the southwest corner right by North Main Street, but you have to walk by a really stinky dumpster, and in the middle of summer, I bet you could tell what that experience is like. And even then, there are no safe ways to walk from the edge of the plaza to the sidewalks along the building. And unfortunately, when they redesigned this plaza, they made it impossible for buses to pull in. So there is no bus service to the doors. Simply, the geometry of the plaza does not allow it. The owners of the plaza could have allowed for the proper geometry, but they didn't want to give up that much space. I should point out, RIPTA does prefer to bring their buses right to the doors because it's best for their riders. It offers convenience and shelter, except of course on express lines where they're trying to make a move. And as an aside, I want to show this photo of one of RIPTA's lines, Providence to Wakefield, and it ends at the Stop and Shop in Wakefield. That's the 65X. And for non-express lines, they strive for the same thing. So for instance, the 92 ends at East Side Market in Providence. Better for riders, better for the drivers too. They can take nature breaks as they need, have a pit stop while they're waiting for their turnover. So why are parking lots hostile to pedestrians? Well, there's no law against building sidewalks for customers. Here's a kind of a progressive look at a parking lot built by a developer who either actually cares about people walking or was forced into this by a local planning agency. It really comes down to greed. It's maximizing the number of cars that can park. But by doing so, who pays for it? It's at the expense of the safety of those very drivers and the passengers of those cars once they exit the vehicles and head toward the doors. But it doesn't have to be that way. We're looking at a plan for a supermarket plaza in Johnston, Rhode Island. And now Johnston, of course, is not widely renowned for being pedestrian friendly, but it doesn't take more than just a few good people to improve a project. The white pavement that you see there is asphalt 3 inches thick. The gray is 10 inches thick, costs a bit more. But planning in Johnston required this parking lot to be built with geometry so that not just delivery trucks, but also buses could maneuver through. That's why it shows the extra thick asphalt, not just around the periphery where the trucks go, but also up by the front doors. And if I could point it out to you, and maybe I can sort of describe where it is. There is actually a sidewalk, only one, but that's one more than most sidewalks. And you can see there's sort of a satellite lot up in the upper left. From that lot, in an east-west direction, or excuse me, it's not east-west, but moving toward the right, you can make out a line. That is a sidewalk that crosses the lot, and in doing so goes by a number of handicap parking spaces, and then across a crosswalk right to the front door. It can be done well. So, parking lots need not be hostile to pedestrians. If you want to make a difference, you can be active in your community and help make it happen. Talk to your planning staff, talk to your planning and zoning boards, the officials that serve on those boards, talk to your elected officials, and get active with your neighborhood associations. And those are the great first steps towards making walking and biking and taking transit to parking better in the future than it is today. And with that, I am going to pass the mic to Dominique, if I can. There we go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. Oh, there we go. So my name is Dominique Resendes. I am the manager of community building and engagement at West Elmwood Housing. And the role, the program that I manage that I'm going to talk about the most today is our Sankofa initiative. So Sankofa is a word that actually is from Ghana, and it's all around using knowledge from the past to move forward. And so that's why you see that symbol of the bird right in the middle. And so why Sankofa exists is because of a need for creating access to fresh, local, affordable, and culturally relevant produce, specifically in the West End of Providence, and to support a West End food system. So that, you know, the food that is being sold in the community reflects those that live there. And so there's a couple different components of Sankofa. So I just wanted to start by showing you this. The Sankofa project was built on a former brownfield site. So if you actually look up the address for Sankofa, 70 Westfield Street, it still shows a vacant lot. I can assure you it is not a vacant lot. This is what Sankofa is now. So it has a couple of interrelated components. So we have 50 units of affordable housing right on site. There is a community garden on site as well, and a market grower space, which provides a larger slate of land for one of the growers at our farmers market that's starting next Wednesday, in a week from today. And a greenhouse as well. And then there's a shared use commercial kitchen and event space, all on the same site. Except the market is at Knight Memorial Library. That's the only thing that's not on site. And so, you know, the reason why there's housing on top of all this is that we realize that, you know, food access doesn't exist in its own silo. You know, oftentimes it's the decision of food or rent for folks, food or utilities. And especially now during COVID, that is something that is even more true. So what we had done a few years back is we actually developed a West End food assessment. And so what we did was through a couple different ways of data collection. We did a retail store food survey where we went to in 2014, we went to stores in the neighborhood that sold food and kind of just looked at what they sold. We did a survey at the Armory Farmers Market. We did a focus group with refugees that lived in the West End. And then we did kind of a baseline survey as well. And so some of the the themes that came up were that although fresh produce was available, there wasn't, there wasn't always transparency in the price of what that food cost. And so many people didn't feel, comfortable purchasing the produce because they didn't know how much it cost. And then also in general, healthy food was still hard to find in the neighborhood. Although a lot of stores had high fat, high sugar items. And so these are kind of just some of the other findings. I'm not going to go into all of them, but feel free to take a look. And then these are the findings from the refugee focus group and the baseline survey. And so what we had found during our focus groups with refugees was that the overall health of folks was really declining once they came to America. And even though people had come to America with advanced culinary, agricultural knowledge and experience, there wasn't as much land for them to grow, especially if they were renting in Providence or in some of the core cities where it's harder to find access to green space. Even across the board, not just refugees, but there is overall an interest in gardening. And so we had that assessment, and then in this year, actually, we conducted a 02907 community needs assessment as part of the 02907 Health Equity Zone. So 02907 does include the West End and then some other neighborhoods as well. So Elmwood, South Providence, and Reservoir as well. And so in this Health Equity Zone, food systems is one of the pillars that we focus on, as well as housing, environmental conditions, education. And so we did a couple of different assessing this year. So we did a community needs survey, we did some focus groups, and we did some resident speak outs. And so that all kind of started right in the middle of COVID. So we had our speak outs in February, and then March came, and that was when we were supposed to do our focus groups and our community needs survey. So we had to include some more broad questions on COVID-19 and how that was affecting things. And so in our survey, we found that transportation assistance was one of the most common forms of assistance people had required in the past 90 days. So over 20% of our survey respondents had cited needing some type of transportation assistance. And that, and another, something else that came out of the survey was, again, that food prices in local stores had been increasing during COVID-19. People felt that the food costs were just getting higher and higher and higher in some of these stores. Then we did some focus groups, and some things that came up were that we had some folks in our focus groups feel that they weren't able to go tend to their gardens or farms if they were taking public transportation. They didn't feel comfortable doing that, especially in the middle of the pandemic. And an additional challenge was that many of the free meals provided lacked culturally appropriate food. And so people were kind of getting, felt like they were just getting these frozen meals, and that there wasn't as many opportunities for them to get like the culturally relevant produce that they needed. During the speak outs, we found, what we did was we listed all the different places in 02907 where you could purchase food, asked people kind of to let us know where do you typically shop, and then had space where if you're leaving your neighborhood, where are you going? And so most people kind of used the stores that existed in their neighborhood, especially those, those culturally relevant stores, kind of not as their primary source, but to kind of supplement, but we're primarily leaving their neighborhood to grocery shop, going to the Price Right in Cranston, the Stop and Shop in Cranston, and then going to Whole Foods. And so, I think about when we had, when we kind of came up with this, this webinar, and not this webinar, this panel, and how a lot of things are different, and I'm not gonna, we talked a lot about the food access needs already, so I'm not gonna go into that. I want to echo the need for more SNAP delivery options. That was something that I didn't put in here, but was another theme across the board for that need for those who are on SNAP that may be, older, immunocompromised, or that need to quarantine, getting access to that SNAP the food that they can use SNAP on is another real challenge. And I think that additionally, what's happening now is really kind of reinforcing the need for green space in neighborhoods, not only for exercise, not only to keep people who have to, who are, at home all day, outside, but also for growing food. And being able to grow food close to home, for the social purpose, for the health purpose, and also for, to supplement their income. So I want to make sure that there's still time for question and answers. So I will stop there so that we can open it up. Let me just stop sharing my screen.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dominique, and thank you so much to all of our panelists. So for folks that are going to have questions, please go ahead and type them in the Q&A function as they occur to you. We did have one a talking point to get started with, which is Eric, for you, can you talk for a minute about secure bicycle parking and how this relates to people's ability to shop by bike?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, it doesn't matter how good our streets are, how conducive our streets are, and intersections to bicycling are. If once somebody gets to the store, they can't lock up their bike. They're just going to have to turn around and go home. And one of the great things about RIPTA is that every single RIPTA bus has a bike carrier in the front that can carry 2 bikes. But if the person gets to the grocery store, takes their bike off, and then doesn't have a place to lock it up, they're just going to go back to the bus stop and wait for the bus to take them home. So it's really incumbent upon all of us to make sure that secure bike parking is available. For supermarkets, it tends to be the developers, the plaza owners, who tend not to be the most responsible, to paint with a broad brush, if I may. I have seen some instances where individual stores on a plaza will, from out of their own pocket, put some bike parking out. It tends to be whatever's cheapest. And those are, of course, the worst. The sort of racks that we refer to as wheel bender racks. Some people call them schoolyard racks, which are really dangerous to park your bike at. But there are lots of really great solutions for bike parking, and different funding streams can be used for bike parking. Here in Providence, quite a bit of bike parking was purchased and installed with CMAQ funding. That's short for Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality. It's a federal funding stream through the U.S. Department of Transportation. So there are a lot of different ways to get bike parking in. It's just a matter of getting it done.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the funding source thing. I actually didn't even know that. I have a question myself that I think a handful of folks might be able to help address, which is, so I'll say personally, I missed the Eagle supermarket. Just walked by yesterday and was lamenting. I'm excited for the new restaurant, but it still kind of pains me to think about that. And so we know that that's kind of the story, that's kind of the trajectory right now, is those neighborhood supermarkets are kind of being phased out. But at the same time, on the west side of Providence, we have Urban Greens Co-op, which is, I think, a year or so old now, something like that. So it's not completely dead, but it seems like it's kind of on life support, this sustaining of these types of businesses. So I'm wondering if folks can speak to, like, what would it take to make sure that these businesses, even like corner stores, just regular corner stores like the couple, Eric, that you pointed out, what would it take to make sure that those don't totally go away, and what can we do, either as elected officials or private citizens, to kind of help ensure that those don't go extinct?
I can start us here. because I think embedded in that there are a handful of different potentially conflicting initiatives that we need to hold. So one, I do think we are going to see more small format stores coming into urban centers. And also, I believe that it's likely those stores are going to target a high income shopper that's looking for specialty items. So the idea being not only how do we create public incentives and support to bring smaller format retail into urban centers, but how do we make sure, like the folks at Urban Greens are doing, that we're able to bring in a much broader base of shoppers and offer them relevant products, as Dominique was saying. So I think that comes both from probably prioritizing locally owned, locally controlled businesses that have roots in the community and access to those broader networks, and also support structures and incentives to make sure that they're have a strong footing in competing against some of those highly consolidated retail chains that just leverage their scale to offer a price advantage. So I don't think the market can do it alone, particularly if we want to hold those values of access and equity in those shopping centers.
That's terrific. I'd like to also take a stab at answering this from my direction, which is in this country, we've spent the last 80 years or whatever subsidizing private automobile travel, and the rise of that goes hand in hand with the rise of the supermarket and the shopping, the distant, like Route 2 here on Rhode Island. Imagine if we hadn't spent the last 60, 70, 80 years just building highways everywhere and subsidizing the use of cars. That hell out on Route 2 in Warwick wouldn't exist. And all of those services would still be in our municipal commercial districts. So part of this solution to this question is to right size how we subsidize transportation for human beings, and put proper amounts of money into public transit and into making our streets more conducive to people getting around on foot and by bike. And when that happens, when those things come together, then that makes it an easier choice for people to do more local shopping, rather than having to get into the car to go to the Stop and Shop off of George Bennett Highway in Pawtucket. People can say, well, now I've got protected bike lanes and I've got a leading pedestrian interval on all of my crosswalks, and all of these different tools that we've got in our toolbox for making conditions safer for those of us who aren't in cars or aren't in SUVs and whatnot. All these tools that we have to make conditions more conducive for walking and biking, we need to implement them. They're in our quivers. Just gotta implement them, and that'll ease the transition.
Yeah, I can add my 2 cents in just to the chorus here. So I think that people who deal with food access issues, just like everybody else, has been affected by what's been going on with COVID, and that there's a real interest in having food delivered, just like there is for anyone else, or at least having that option. And people who use the country's largest supplemental food program, the supplemental nutrition program called SNAP, which used to be food stamps, as Laura mentioned, until recently couldn't purchase food online at all. And now they can, but the structural issue there is that only Amazon and Walmart are allowed to provide that service. So this has obviously a negative impact, or will have a negative impact, on the independent grocers that have been serving those communities that have a high proportion of SNAP users. So we may not be able to open up online SNAP purchasing for all of those retailers, but we can make sure that you know, they can provide food to people who are SNAP users through other means. So that may mean a partnership with a community-based organization that assists with ordering, pickup, and delivery. That may need to be subsidized, at least until data is collected that shows that, you know, it was good for the store, good enough to be able to afford a part-time driver. In addition, a piece that we've been doing with Farm Fresh Rhode Island is working to get farms themselves that have CSAs or farm stands certified to be SNAP retailers. And they actually, in some ways, would have an easier time of it than the small independent grocers, because there are federal funds available right now for them to purchase the POS equipment, the card swiper that you need in order to take SNAP benefits. So right at the same time that online SNAP is becoming available for Amazon, people who are going to shop at Amazon and Walmart, the small stores are maybe losing those customers if they're serving SNAP clients who want their food delivered. We also have an increased opportunity for those SNAP users to get locally grown food from our farmers directly, because they're being certified to be SNAP retailers for the first time. So just add those pieces in.
Great, thanks to all three of you for that. So we have one question here that I think we kind of just answered, but I think it's interesting to think about it in the frame of this, how this question puts it. I think this will be our last question as well, because we're kind of running short on time. What is the collective opinion about going back to the small supermarkets, kind of European style, where all are close? You can buy some things in a shop and others in a closer shop. Like, I think Eric, you kind of mentioned this before, like having your separate, like your bakery, your kind of greengrocer, your butcher, or some combination maybe of those that are in a small supermarket. So I think this is kind of expanding on the same question, but, you know, do you think that those individual, having those little shops like that, it's possible to return to the US? And I'll mention really quickly that there are a handful of very successful, you know, small family-owned bakeries around town. I'm just thinking right here in Providence. And we even have, you know, like relatively new fishmonger. Actually, there's going to be a kind of a second one, but one on the west side. So it's not unheard of. We do see a little bit of like specks of these types of businesses, but I think I'll pass that question along to the rest of you.
Yeah, I mean, I can just follow up on that by saying I think a lot has to do with the way that we plan and the way that we decide to invest. And a lot of that investment does relate to public dollars and the way that they're expended. So there's an opportunity, I think, right now, because people are rethinking the way they've always shopped, to kind of work with the planning and investing community to understand what's happening and to shift investment practices and build in the right voices to planning processes that can help build us toward the future that we'd like to see, where these types of stores and these types of choices for people who deal with food access are more and more available.
All right, the very last question that I'll kind of combine, which a little bit, I think Eric kind of answered, but it's basically like, how do we get started making these changes, even like having more community gardens or keeping these small businesses? Like, what does a private citizen do to help?
Well, you can certainly learn about what the Food Policy Council is doing by reviewing our website, which is rifoodcouncil.org, and following us on Facebook and Twitter. We do provide multiple opportunities for public input on issues that we are then turning around and condensing and providing to the state government. And we are going to have a stakeholder survey coming out in a couple of weeks, actually, where we'll be collecting this type of information. So we would hope that everyone who's on the call would answer that, including the panelists and you, CJ, because we try to get as broad an input of information into those types of processes as possible.
And I think in terms of getting started, it can be as simple as just engaging in conversation with folks that are already doing some of this work. So, you know, if there's a community garden in your neighborhood, stopping by and just chatting with people that are there about, you know, what's working and what's not and challenges that they have. And likewise on the retail front, even if there's not a neighborhood grocery store, there might be a bakery or some other small business that might be facing a lot of the same challenges in terms of planning policy and land use, and also just supply chain economies of scale and trying to be competitive and available to a broad base of folks. And so I think just starting with some education around what we have today and what's working and the challenges that those folks face in making those businesses or entities sustainable.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, I would say a good starting place is to check out what all these folks on our panel are up to, their organizations. They're all doing great things. So we're gonna cut it off here. Thank you so much to all of our attendees for sticking with us. Big thanks to all of our panelists, Dominique, Laura, Eric, and Nessa. Again, we have a ton of webinars coming up on the slate. Check them out. We'll have one in a week, and then the week after that, week after that. But if you have any further questions, you can send them to me. I think you have my email, and I will, if you know, I can, I'll forward them along to these fine folks and hopefully get back to you. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great day, and I hope to see you again in the future.
Thanks.